Okay, so we are in the middle of a conversation. The nature of that conversation is that the Mishnah told us that there's a case of two people who each approach at the Beis Din holding on to a tallis. Right? Tallis in this case is not a religious article. Tallis in this case refers to a robe, a cloak, something like that. And there's a conflict between these two guys because the one person says, I found it. And the other guy says, I found it. So the first guy says, it's mine. So the other person says, it's mine. Now at this point, the Gemorah has unpacked that. The Gemorah has explained to us that what's really going on over here is two possible scenarios. The one scenario is that they literally were walking in the street and they found the tallis lying in the street and it didn't seem to have an owner, and they each lunged at it to claim it as theirs, and somehow they both landed up holding on to it. Nobody could prove to us if, in fact, either of them got there first and therefore really has a claim on the tallis. So we don't know how to resolve this. We don't have any witnesses. Nobody could corroborate what happened. So what is the solution that the Mishnah proposes? And
swear,
take an oath that each of these people has to stand in front of the courts, take an oath which includes using Hashem's name, and the nature of that oath has to be that no less than half of the tallis belongs to me, and then we split it between them. And we had a whole conversation about, the varieties of why we have to say both cases, etc. We're now at a different point in the Gemorah, where the Gemorah is basically saying, look, in our Mishnah, you may notice there's no name of any rabbi. That is what we call a stam Mishnah. The nature of a stam Mishnah is that this is a Mishnah without any specific opinion, i.e., it must be widely accepted by all opinions, because it's quite logical. If somebody disagreed with this Mishnah, the Mishnah would have recorded that. So there'd be a name in the Mishnah. The fact that there are no names mentioned in the Mishnah tells you that this has to be something which is accepted across the board. We need to now fact check that. In other words, we've got to call up other rabbis who discuss similar laws and see if in fact their opinion in those cases does actually gel with our Mishnah. That's what we've got to test. So what do? We brought up a person called Ben Nanas, who was a rabbi quoted in a different Mishnah that seemed very similar to ours, and yet his conclusion was different to the conclusion of our Mishnah. We tested it, and we came to the conclusion that actually there's no conflict over here because the nature of the two cases were different. That's how we resolved that. We're now in the next scenario, which is the case of who? Sumchus. Okay, Sumchus is another early Talmudic sage. And Sumchus has a running debate, actually. It's not a single case. He has a running debate with the other sages over a series of cases where they both argue along the same lines. So we used one of those examples, the ox that gores the cow. The cow was pregnant. By the time we arrive on the scene, the fetus is lying next to the cow. We don't know what happened. We don't know if the cow gave birth and therefore was vulnerable and was gored by the ox, and the birth or premature birth of this fetus is unrelated to the attack. If that's the case, the owner of the ox has no responsibility for the fetus. Or what happened was the ox attacked the cow while it was pregnant, and because of the attack, it miscarried and lost the fetus, in addition to the fact that it lost its own life. In which case, the owner of the ox is liable for the value of the cow and of the fetus. So the cow's not in question. Everybody acknowledges that the owner of the ox has to compensate the owner of the cow. That's clear. Question is, what about the fetus? And there we land up with two opinions. Again, there's no witnesses, very similar to our case, right? Our case is something that is in dispute. Nobody can prove their claim. So surely the same way we resolve our case would be the way that you resolve that case. You have a financial amount that is in dispute between two parties where neither party can prove their claim. Same as our case, right? There, the item in dispute is a cow. Here, the item in dispute is the tallis. That's the only difference. But outside of that, in both cases, one person versus one person, he says this is what happened, he says that is what happened, nobody can prove it. So according to Sumchus, how do we resolve that case? So
Divide it.
he says you divide it. So you take the value, correct, exactly. So you take the value of the cow. The value of the cow is not the full liability of the owner of the ox, because the halacha happens to be that if your ox randomly gores somebody else's cow and it's unexpected, you only carry actually liability for half of the damage, for half of the loss, because you never knew your ox was going to do this, and an ox is typically a docile creature, so you're not held fully liable. Whereas if your ox had already established a pattern of being pretty aggressive, then you would carry the full liability. So the amount in question is not the half of the value of the cow, because you have to pay that. The amount in question is the value of the fetus. So do you have to pay for the fetus? Don't you have to pay for the fetus? Okay, that's the amount in question. Sumcha says, well, let's say that the value of the fetus was $100, and because this is a docile ox, you're only liable for 50 of the 100, and that 50 is what's in doubt, so pay 25. That way, you as the perpetrator, or the owner of the ox that's the perpetrator, you are now paying half of the loss, and the victim is taking half of the loss. So basically, you're splitting the amount in question.
So
Exactly
splitting the amount for the cow and splitting the amount.
Yeah, so the amount for the cow is not in question. So the amount for the cow, you are liable for 50% of that. Nobody's splitting anything. You're liable for 50%, you're paying the 50%. It's the question of whether you are or are not liable for the 50% of the value of the fetus. So you're going to pay 25%, which effectively means that you and the victim have split that amount of money. You're losing 25%, he is losing by not receiving 25%. It's almost exactly the same as our Mishnah, except that Sumchus does not require you to take an oath. That's a red flag. Our Mishnah has no names in it, implying that all people, Sumchus included, would agree with the method proposed by our Mishnah. And what's the method proposed by our Mishnah? Before you divide the money, they must stand in front of a court, they must make an oath, which is a very serious business, and if they do that, then the court will be satisfied that we can now split the value of that tallis between them. Sumchus doesn't seem to feel that we need that kind of gravitas, that we don't need that kind of pressure. Sumchus seems to feel that you don't need to put them on the podium, have their hand on the Torah, make them invoke Hashem's name, warn them about the severity of using Hashem's name in vain, and then get an oath. Sumchus just says simple. We don't know what to do with the money. Split it. Why is he not in our Mishnah? He should be a dissenting voice in our Mishnah. He should say, I agree that you divide it. I don't agree that you need an oath. Where's he? What's that?
He's talking about a different.
How's it different?
I don't know what it is.
Ah.
But it's for sure different.
Okay.
It's a third party.
Because otherwise-
the animal is acting, not the person.
Well, the animal equals the tallis.
Well, the initial thing
But-
was
but
that you have
Tallis-
to take an oath.
Yeah.
And he's saying you don't have to.
Correct. There's the conflict. So
Yeah.
if he has a conflict with our Mishnah, why is he not recorded in the
Tallis,
Mishnah?
they
No,
were
no, no.
both there with the ox.
It wasn't
No one
owned
saw
by
that.
anybody at the time.
It doesn't matter if you were or not there. At the end of the day, I can't say it doesn't matter if you were or not there. It does matter if you were not there. But the information that we have currently is the issue is you cannot prove your claim. That's the similarity. You cannot prove your claim.
Here's the thing, the mission is a cloud. His disagreement is in the specific, so his agreement is for the general principle.
How does that work?
So he agrees
What,
with the
and
Mishnah,
what I
he's
mean to
not
say
the
is, how do you get that the Mishnah is a klal?
I'm proposing.
Oh, okay. But on what basis?
I'm proposing
What
because
makes-
he for sure agrees with the Mishnah.
What I'm trying to say is, what makes the case the Mishnah is using more of a generic case than the case of the ox and the.
I just threw
and
it
the
out there.
Okay, fine. No, I thought there
But
was
I-
there was
no,
reasoning.
But I just
Okay.
threw it out there because it's intuitive to me that he's not named in the Mishnah. Right?
Yeah.
Which means that he agrees with the Mishnah.
Yes, exactly.
So therefore, and he does not agree in his opinion, clearly.
Yes.
Therefore, his opinion is not the same as the Mishnah.
Correct. So somewhere in this conversation, we will have to arrive at the point that they are not the same. The two are not the same. That's obviously where we're going with this. That's not enough. We need to work out why they're not
But
the
it's
same, right?
It's not intention. What's the intention behind it? So if two people doing it, their act can be one saw someone taking it, therefore they take it, so can I take it. The intention was malicious. Could have been malicious, as opposed to just physically or I randomly saw something. The animals, it's fact. The animals did something. There's no difference on intention. Exactly.
Okay, that's a good observation. That the minute there's a human involved, you have to question intentions. Good point.
The cow was already someone's property. It was owned by somebody.
Yes.
Whereas the coat was just lying there.
Fair. Another distinction, right? Unless it's the case where they're buying it, because remember that's one of the options, is that they're arguing over who bought it, which means that the owner who's selling it obviously owned it at the point that he was selling it. Okay. Good. Now, who's the other opinion in the Sumchus case? Because Sumchus is debating this issue with a group, right? With the Chachamim, with the sages. So how do the sages handle this case where you've got the fetus that's in question, we don't know whether or not you actually get to be compensated for the fetus? So how do the sages deal with that? So they teach us a principle which is called Hamoitzi Mechaveroi Olav Horayim, which means any time that any person wants to extract money or an asset from another person, the onus, the burden of proof is on them. And as we discussed last week, because if that were not the case, you'd have anarchy, right? It would be a ridiculous world if I could come up to you and say, that's my watch. It'd be crazy if I would have a claim. So I need to have the burden of proof, right? I need to be able to illustrate that that is my watch. So somebody wants to take something away from another person, Olav Haraya, the responsibility is on him to bring a raya. A raya means evidence that it's his. Now, in that case, can anybody bring any evidence? I'm saying, in the case of the ox that gored the cow, can anybody bring evidence? No, because there are no witnesses. That's the nature of the case. So, in the absence of witnesses, what happens according to the rabbis?
To take an oath.
No.
You split it.
No. That's Sumchus. Sumchus is the one who said you split it. They're arguing with Sumchus. So, according to the sages, what do you do in this case?
Well, you don't
That's
do
what
it-
Sumchus said.
You don't do anything.
You don't do anything. That's exactly right. You don't do anything. You cannot touch an asset unless you can prove that it's yours. You cannot touch money unless you can prove you have a claim. Seeing as in this case there is no proof, meaning there are no witnesses, therefore you cannot touch the money. Nothing happens. You do nothing. So let's plug the sages into our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, can you prove that the Tallis is yours? No, you cannot. So, should you be able to get the Tallis? No, you should not. So why the rabbi is not in our Mishnah as a dissenting voice? How?
I'm saying, like, you asked the question of the rabbis who said it should be split as a decision, where rather nothing should be done as a decision. So why are the rabbis now not saying nothing should be done? That's what's
Okay, so correct. So it's the same question. You could basically see it from both sides, right? But the point being, we're making the case that everybody across the entire Mishnaic reality agrees with our Mishnah, agrees with how our Mishnah says that you should operate. Which is, in this case, what you've got to do, you've got to split the value between them on the basis of an oath. So, how do you square that off with this opinion that says, unless you have evidence, you get nothing?
Well, they've got to take an oath.
No. According to the rabbis, only evidence counts. An oath isn't evidence.
Yes, but an oath is them swearing that.
No, but it's not evidence.
Correct. Which the rabbis say is not acceptable in order to get money from somebody.
But the Mishnah says it is acceptable, and the rabbi said not.
That's the question.
Yeah, just to.
Correct. That's the question. So where we are at this point, this is where we got up to last week. Where we are at this point is effectively what we've done is we said, we have a big problem with this Mishnah in context of Sumchus, to which the Gemorah said, and guess what? You also have the same problem in context of the rabbis, because when you say in context of Sumchus, you give the impression the rabbis are fine. Actually, they're not fine. Okay, so let's read that inside. Again, last week we did the whole overview, which is that mind map that you got at the beginning of the page. But we want to obviously move a little forward, so we're not going to go back and look at that. Okay, so I think just by a stroke of divine providence, the fact that we didn't have enough sheets to pass around is a good reminder for me that it's about time I think people started to actually get a Gemorah. Because then you can start to have the real experience of learning the Gemorah, you know. All right. So, Leima masnisin deloi kasumchos. I'm going back to the top of that section, right? Leima masnisin deloi kasumchos. What's page 13, I think it is, if I'm not mistaken. 40. Leima masnisin deloi kasumchos. Let us suggest that the nature of, or the ruling of our Mishnah does not parallel with the view of Sumchus. Why not? I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly because we've just discussed it, right? Because if you were going to try and apply the opinion of Sumchus, what he holds is Ha'amar, did he not say Mammon hamut mutu b'safek cholkim beloy shavua? Did he not say that if you have money that is in question, like here, the money is who deserves the Tallis, the best way to deal with it is you split it equally between the two parties without having to take an oath, right? That's what he says. And our Gemorah said, our Mishnah said you have to take an oath. To which the Gemorah responded, Ve'ela mai rabbanon. So what would you prefer? Would you prefer to argue that the rabbis who disagree with Sumchus do agree with our Mishnah? Because that's normally where the logic goes, right? If that rabbi disagrees with our Mishnah, the likelihood is the people he's arguing with agree with our Mishnah. That's what you'd expect to happen. So, what do you think is going to happen? That the rabbis of that Mishnah debating Sumchus about how you deal with this money in question, they're going to agree with our Mishnah. Well, guess what? Omri, do they not say that if you want to be able to get money or an asset from another person, you have to bring hard evidence. Hard evidence equals witnesses. And if there are no witnesses, you get nothing. Now, in our Mishnah, there are no witnesses, and you get half the Tallis. So how does that work? How do you parallel those two opinions? That's what we got up to last week. In order to answer this, the Gemorah is going to use a technique. I've identified that technique on the worksheet. The Gemorah is going to use a technique. It's a very useful technique to know because the Gemorah does use it in many places. The technique is made up of two segments. The first segment goes I Omras Bi Shloma, and the second segment goes Ela I Omras. Okay, it's a lot of words. So let's try and unpack what those words all mean, bit by bit. What does the word I mean in Aramaic? If. Okay, it's one of the easiest words to remember because it sounds similar in Aramaic to the translation in English. So, if, omros. Omros. Comes from the word says, that's true. But the form, omros.
The one who said.
If it was Hebrew, it would have been im omarta. What would that mean? If you say. If you say. Remember, you ask the question. I'm replying to you. Right? And I'm saying to you, Omros, if you would say,
It's okay.
Dot, Bishlama, that would be okay. Remember, last week we looked at the word shalom and shalem. So we said shalem means whole, and shalom means peace. And they are connected because ultimately, when things are whole, they are in a state of peace. Bishlama means your statement, your logic would be sound and therefore would be at peace. So, Amras Bishlama introduces a proposal, a hypothesis that we say, if this were the hypothesis, or if you were considering this angle, everything would make sense. Ela. Now, anytime you have the word Ela in Gemorah, it has a very specific meaning. What does Ela mean? Rather. The nature of rather is, but what I'm about to say next is either going to make things much more difficult to process, or is going to completely reject what you've just said. Now, in this formula where it's E Amras Bishlama, Ele E Amras, so E Amras Bishlama, if you're going to make the following proposal, I can live with that. That's okay. It makes sense. Elo, however, E Amras, if you're going to try the other approach, that's going to be not only problematic, but even more problematic than we thought. Okay, so what's going on over here? The Gemorah started like this. Listen, there's a rabbi called Sumchus. The rabbi called Sumchus, in our estimation, comments on a case that's pretty much like the case of our Mishnah. How is it like the case of our Mishnah? Because in our Mishnah, there is an issue, an asset that is in dispute. There are no witnesses. Here's how you deal with it. Take an oath and then split it. Sumchus is talking about a very similar case. There's an asset that is in dispute, the fetus of the cow. There are no witnesses. So far, it's exactly the same. Sumchus says split it. That's very much like our Mishnah, but he says without an oath. Different to our Mishnah. That's how the question began, right? Then we said, okay, well, what about the rabbis who are part of that same conversation with Sumchus, who say that the only way to deal with this is you get nothing until you have evidence? How come we're giving 50% of a Tallis to a guy who has no evidence and 50% of the Tallis to another guy who has no evidence? How do you work that out? So then Gemorah is going to say, here must be Shlomo Rabbanon. The rabbis are an easy answer. Easy answer. But now that you think about it, the question about Sumchus is a bigger question than we initially thought. That's where this is going. Okay? So let's read it inside. The Gemorah is going to say now, Hi, my, which we translated last week, right? Hi, my. What does hi mean?
Yes.
What does hi mean?
You say it now. You said it now. Wow.
Hi means this. Hi, this. What's my? What? So the Gemara is going to ask, hi, my. You've now raised two questions. They are very big questions. So hi, my. This question, my, what's the conclusion? How do we resolve it? Okay? In other words, the Gemara asked a question. The response to that question was another question. That didn't help us. So hi, my. Now what are we supposed to do? How do we clarify? How do we work this out? So the Gemara goes as follows. I omras bishlama rabbanon. If you're going to suggest or you're going to compare the opinion of the rabbis who debate Sumchus to the opinion of our Mishnah, bishlama, that's going to be fine. That's going to be doable. It's going to be comfortable. It's going to be easy to explain. Why? Why is it easy to explain? So before we read it, let's try to think logically. There is a major difference between what the rabbis debating Sumchus were talking about and what our Mishnah is talking about. And that major difference is hinted at in the expression they use. Ha-moitzi mei-chaveroi. If somebody wants to take from their friend, alav haraya, they have to first bring evidence. Don't talk about our case. Just talk in generic terms. What does this scenario look like? And I think somebody here already touched on this before, alluded to this before, I can't remember who. So, what does this scenario look like? Hamotzi mechaveroi. Somebody wants to claim or take something from somebody else. What does it look like?
You have to show that.
Now, what does the case look like? What does the case look like?
Well, someone's lost money, he wants to claim it. Someone's been.
Okay. What does the case look like? That's a scenario. Okay.
One party's impact.
One party wants to.
Good. So
Restitution.
Okay. Let's look at what each of the two parties look like when they arrive at the Beis Din.
One's
Okay.
a victim,
Okay.
one's an accuser, and one's a defendant.
One's a claimant and one's a defendant. Okay. So what is the? So let's make this a little bit clearer. Let's say the claim is on a Tallis, just to make it easier for us. So the claim is on a
But
Tallis.
they have equal claims. Our case is not a defendant versus an accuser.
Correct. Exactly. So let's first do their case, and we'll come back to our case. But you got it. Okay. So in the Chachamim's case, let's say that there was a debate, an argument or a claim on a Tallis. So we're using the same item that's in our Mishnah. And the nature of the claim that the rabbis describe is Hamoitzi mechaveroi olav haraya. If you want to take that Tallis from somebody else, you have the burden of proof. So describe it. Where is the Tallis?
In someone's possession.
In whose hand?
The guy you want to take it from.
The defendant's hand.
Defendant.
The defendant's hand, right? So the Tallis is in the defendant's hand. Does the claimant have the Tallis in his hand?
No.
No.
He's got the claim.
He's got the claim. He does not have the Tallis in his hand.
Both hold it.
No. In the Chachamim who debate Sumchus. The Chachamim who say Hamoitzi mechaveroi olav haraya. They, what case would they be talking about? Yankel has a Tallis in his hands, and Shmerel has an accusation that you're holding my Tallis. Because we know that possession is 9/10 of the law, we understand why the law favors Yankel. He's got the Tallis in his hands. Again, if you don't favor Yankel, you create anarchy, where any person could walk up to any person and start a whole thing. You're wearing my shirt, those are my keys, that's my car, you're in my house. To be ridiculous, right? So there has to be a basic consideration that if you've got something in your possession, the likelihood is that it's yours. And if somebody wants to undermine that likelihood, they're going to have to come with ammo. So, is that the same as our Mishnah? Not at all. Because the whole foundation of moitzi mechaveroi is those two words. Moitzi means I want to take away mechaveroi from somebody else. That implies I currently don't have it. Not even a fraction of it. And they currently have all of it. What's the scenario in our Mishnah?
They're sharing it.
So who's the moitzi in our Mishnah?
Both are.
No, there's no moitzi. Because you can only be moitzi if you've established that it belongs to the other person. I cannot say I'm taking something away from you if I don't yet know that it's yours. So there is no moitzi, there's no chaveroi in this case. There's no claimant, there's no defendant. There are two people trying to establish ownership. It's a different case. The whole logic, the rationale of possession is 9/10 of the law doesn't help you because nobody has possession yet. The rationale of saying if you want something that is in somebody else's jurisdiction, you have to bring evidence doesn't apply yet because nobody has established jurisdiction yet.
The money.
What do you mean the money?
If someone owes someone money,
Yeah.
is it considered also under the same?
If somebody owes somebody money, that is the first case the rabbis are talking about. Hamoitzi mechaveroi. I say, you owe me money. Where's the money right now? In your account. So you are the defendant. And I am the claimant who says that money should be coming to me. If I don't have evidence, I don't have access to your money.
So it's not only about an item that you can visualize.
No. It's about anything that somebody could own.
Okay.
So, is there a disparity between the rabbis and our Mishnah?
Yes.
No disparity because they're talking about totally different cases. Right? You cannot argue or you cannot claim that there's a dispute between two people if they're discussing different realities. You can only claim a dispute or a debate if it's about the same scenario. So, let's just say if you drop the milk fork into the meat pot, you might have two halachic opinions about how you're supposed to treat that. You'd call that a machloikas. You'd call that a debate because one is saying you don't have to worry, just leave the fork for 24 hours and you could use it. And the other one is saying you have to boil it in water and whatever the case. Two different halachic opinions. But if you are approached by your friend who says, you know what happened to me? I dropped the milk fork into the meat pot. What do you think I should do? Before I go to the rabbi, maybe you could just help me because I know you've had experiences with this. And the person says, well, in my case, the rabbi said I had to throw away the frying pan. You'll say, that doesn't help me. I'm not talking about a frying pan. Frying pan's a different issue, different level of heat. It's Teflon coated. It's a whole different issue to a pot, which is typically stainless steel, and a fork. And it's not the same type of heat. It's not a frying heat. It's a boiling heat. It's a whole different thing. Don't tell me there's a debate now between your rabbi and my rabbi. My rabbi is talking about a fork in a pot, and your rabbi is talking about a frying pan. So in the same way over here, don't tell me there's a debate between the sages and our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is talking about a scenario where nobody has claimed jurisdiction, has proven jurisdiction yet, and they're talking about a case where it's very clear that this seems to be a person's property, and you're trying to say otherwise, in which case you have to bring evidence. No debate. Easy to resolve. Must be shlama. If you want to discuss the rabbis in context of our Mishnah, that's an easy one to dismiss. Easiest thing in the world to show that there's no debate over here. So just reading it in the words. So, if you are going to say that the rabbis appear to be in contrast to our Mishnah, don't worry, be shlama. That's easy to settle. You know why? Because we're going to use another mechanism over here, which is called the Hasam Hacha method. The Hasam Hacha method. What does the word Hasam mean?
Innocent.
No, that's Hebrew. This is Aramaic.
Okay.
Okay? What does Hasam in Aramaic mean? There. What does Hacha in Aramaic mean? Here. That's the apples and bananas. There, it's talking about one thing. Here, it's talking about something else. It's an easy way to resolve what appears to be a conflict. You say, well, there and here are not actually discussing the same thing. Therefore, they cannot be at loggerheads because they're not talking about the same subject. So, if you're going to want to try and compare the rabbis in the Sumchus goring ox case to the rabbis in our Mishnah about the fighting over the Tallis case, Bishlama, easy to sort that out. Why? Because Hasam, in that case of the claim, hey, your ox was the reason my cow lost its fetus, that's a scenario where loy, not, tafsi, what does tofes mean? To grab. Teravayu, it's a great word because it's really a very, very simple word that's been made into a big word because of suffixes. Okay? So travayu comes from the word tray. Tray, we've already learned before, means two. Tray, vaihu, two of them. That's how, okay, so we say the word travayu. So, Hasam over there in the case of the ox and the cow, the Lord tafsi teravayu. You don't have the two litigants both holding the money in question. The money in question is sitting in somebody's bank account. The accident happened on the street in the middle of town, and the money that's being claimed is sitting at the guy's house in his vault. Nobody's holding the money, trying to yank it away from the other person's money. From the other person. Therefore, the rabbis say, okay, well, it's not two people with possession being 9/10 of the law. It's one person, the guy who's got the money in his pocket. He's got possession is 9/10 of the law. So you want to take it from him? Prove that you deserve it. Whereas Abel Hacha, no, not Abel, just Hacha. Whereas our case over here, what's our case over here? De Travayu Tofsi, where the scenario is that you have two people equally holding the Tallis. So that means you have two people who have absolutely equal claims. Or for that matter, absolutely equal non-claims. Right? Tafsi Travayu. That means no facts have been established yet of this case. No possession has been established. No jurisdiction has been established. In that case, Palgila Bishvua. The rabbis would be quite satisfied that in that scenario, there is a way to fix this by making them each take an oath and then splitting it. It's not a debate. It's not a contradiction. It's a different scenario. But now that you mention it, but if you're going to try and align the opinion of Sumchus, who's used the same language as our Mishnah, split it. He just said without an oath. That's very different to our Mishnah, right? So, if you're going to say Sumchus, then surely if Uma Hasam, we're going to use a similar technique, right? Instead of the Hasam Hacha technique, there compared to here, we're going to say Uma Hasam. Let us actually accelerate the question based on the comparison. In other words, like this. Uma Hasam. How about over there? In the case of the ox, whereas we have just mentioned, the law tafsi trabayu, nobody in that case was holding the money. Right? They're just standing there staring at their, it's exactly like a car accident, right? They're both standing there in the middle of the road trying to work out what happened, taking down each other's details. That's what's happening. The lo tafsi travayu, there isn't this case of they're both now holding onto the pouch of money saying, hey, I deserve that money because of what your ox did to my cow. That's not happening. And in spite of that, in spite of the possession is 9/10 of the law, still, according to Sumchus Cholkin, that's a radical opinion. Sumchus is willing to take 50% of the value away from a person who currently has ownership of that money without evidence, without even an oath. Cholkin beloy shavua, you can split it without an oath. Do you see how radical Sumchus's opinion is? He says the minute there's a question over how to divide money, just divide it. He doesn't even call on them to show some kind of belief in their claim, make an oath. Nothing. Just split it. So, in our case, where they are both holding the Tallis, loy kol shekain, is that not more of a logical reason that they should be allowed to divide it without an oath? See what we've done here? You said, it sounds like Sumchus is a bit uncomfortable, misaligned with our Mishnah. To which the Gemorah said, yeah, well, it looks like the rabbis in the Sumchus case are misaligned with our Mishnah. To which we said, no, they're completely aligned with our Mishnah. Why? Why are they aligned? Because the cases are different. And in the other case, there is more logic to say you cannot take something from a person who has it in their possession until you prove that you deserve it. And in that case, where you have one guy who has so much more claim on that money because it's in his possession, Sumchus is willing to take it from him. He's willing to take half that money from him and award it to the other guy without even making the other guy take an oath. So you don't think Sumchus would say if there's two people visibly holding on to the Tallis, just let them split it. I'm not even taking it away from anybody. Surely Sumchus is at loggerheads with our Mishnah. So how are we going to resolve that? Next week.